She lay crumpled in a shallow ditch off a forgotten back road, bruised, unconscious, and nearly hidden beneath the fall of golden leaves. Her young son stood a few feet away, silent and trembling, his small arm raised in a desperate wave at the only car that had bothered to slow down. No one else had. But the man behind the wheel, he didn't know it yet, was about to change the course of 3 lives, including his own. If you believe in stories born from grace, from the spark of human kindness, the ache of healing and the miracle of second chances, then stay. Subscribe. Follow this story, because sometimes one small act of compassion cracks the whole world open and lets the light in. Let me take you back to the moment it all began. Cassian Wolfe hadn't planned to be on that road. Normally he stuck to the highway, straighter, quicker, less riddled with old ghosts. But that day, something pulled him off course. Maybe it was the way the late October sun flickered through the cottonwoods. Maybe it was Rowan, his 6-year-old daughter, who had pointed out the window and whispered, "Daddy, the trees look like they're whispering." Or maybe, just maybe, it was time for something to change. The back road was narrow, mostly gravel, the sound crunching beneath the tires of his old Chevy pickup. Cassian drove slowly, one hand on the wheel, the other wrapped around a lukewarm coffee in a paper cup. A gentle folk song murmured from the radio, calm and steady, until it wasn't. A boy ran into the road. Cassian slammed the brakes. The truck skidded wildly on the loose gravel, lurching hard sideways. The coffee spilled across his flannel shirt, but he barely noticed. His heart was hammering. He threw the truck into park, flung the door open, and jumped out. The boy didn't cry, didn't speak, just stood there barefoot, wide-eyed, his face streaked with dirt and what looked like blood. He pointed, trembling, toward the tree line. Cassian followed the boy's gaze. There, at the edge of the ditch, buried in leaves, lay a woman. He ran to her, boots slipping in the soft soil as he dropped to his knees. She was curled on her side like a broken doll, hair matted with blood, clothes torn and damp, a thin line of blood traced from her temple to her jaw. Her chest moved, barely. "Ma'am?" Cassian's voice was sharp, urgent. "Can you hear me?" Nothing. He checked her pulse. Faint, but there. He looked up at the boy, still pointing, still silent. Cassian knew that look. He'd worn it once himself, the dazed expression of someone who had stopped believing help would ever come. "Okay," he said, steadying his breath. "Okay, I've got you." He ran back to the truck and grabbed what supplies he could. An old wool blanket, duct tape, a roll of fishing line, hand sanitizer, and a rag stiff with grease. Not much, but he'd done more with less. He wrapped the blanket around her carefully, avoiding her neck. Her arm was clearly dislocated, so he used the tape and line to fashion a crude splint. He cleaned the blood from her face, whispering apologies when she flinched at the sting. When she moaned, just barely, he let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "She's breathing," he said aloud. The boy had moved closer. "What's your name?" Cassian asked gently. "Odden," the boy whispered. Cassian repeated it, imprinting it in memory. "I'm Cassian. I'm going to take you both somewhere safe." Odden didn't answer, but for the first time he reached out and took Cassian's hand. She was too light, malnourished. He could feel the cold through the blanket as he carried her up the slope. He settled her carefully into the back seat, then opened the passenger door for Odden, who climbed in without a word, arms folded tightly across his chest. Cassian drove. He didn't call for help, not because he didn't believe in it, but because something in his gut said not to. She looked like someone who'd been betrayed by systems too many times already. As the sun dropped below the hills, his cabin came into view. A cedar-framed house nestled against the forest, with a porch swing that hadn't moved in seasons, and a chimney that only smoked on Sundays. He carried her inside. Rowan had already come home from school, watched over by a kind neighbor. She ran to the door, wide-eyed. "Daddy," she whispered. "Who's that lady? Does she need our help?" "She does, sweetheart," he said gently. "Can you bring me the big pillow from the couch?" Rowan nodded and ran off. He laid the woman on the couch, propped her up carefully. Odden stood close, fists tight. "Is she going to die?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. Cassian met his eyes, steady as stone. Not tonight. Night fell quietly. Rowan was asleep in Cassian's bed. Odden curled in the armchair, still wearing a coat that didn't fit. Cassian sat by the woman's side, watching her chest rise and fall. Her bruised face was elegant, proud even in pain. Her jawline, her strong brows, her trembling lips, they told stories. Hard ones. This wasn't an ending. This was a beginning. When a lone heart opened her eyes, the world had stopped spinning. No sirens, no slamming doors, no voices accusing her of things she hadn't done. Only quiet. Wood creaked beneath her. Wind sighed against the windows, soft as breath. She tried to sit, pain flaring through her ribs and shoulder. Her head throbbed, deep and hollow, echoing inside her skull. She winced, scenting wood smoke and something warm, bacon grease maybe, cinnamon. The blanket was heavy, like someone was holding her in place. She didn't trust it. The cabin wasn't a hospital or a shelter. The walls were panelled with dark wood, real books lined the shelves, and a fire cracked in the hearth. A flannel shirt hung on a hook, oversized, worn. She wasn't alone. A man sat in a rocking chair, quiet and still, coffee in one hand. He hadn't shaved in days. When she stirred, he lifted his eyes, but didn't speak. Neither did she. Finally, he stood. "You're awake," he said. Voice low and calm, she licked her lips. He asked, "Where's your son?" Panic flashed in her eyes. "He's fine," the man added quickly. "Sleeping like a log. My daughter tucked him in." Her breath hitched. She sat up too fast. Pain crushed her ribs. She gasped. "Careful," he said, stepping forward. "2 bruised ribs. Dislocated shoulder. I made a splint." She blinked, surprised. Sure enough, her arm was neatly braced with a board, fishing line and duct tape. "I'm Cassian Wolfe," he said. "Your son flagged me down." The memory broke through like floodwater. Odden. The road. Her prayer. Simple, desperate. Let him be safe. Her voice cracked. "How long?" "Just over a day." "You should have taken me to a hospital." "I would have," he said quietly, "but I figured if you wanted police or doctors, you'd have asked, and I didn't want to risk them taking your boy." She froze. No one had thought like that. Not in years. Not since her husband died and the world turned cruel. No judge, no officer, no neighbour. But this stranger? Her lip trembled. She looked away. Cassian didn't press. He poured her a glass of water, placed it in her hands. "You should drink." She did, hands shaking. Her eyes wandered to the shelves. Steinbeck, National Geographic, a worn-out children's book. "Are we in the woods?" "Technically. Town's 15 miles out. Built this place myself with my late wife." She froze again. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's been 5 years." She looked at the fire. "Feels longer than a day. Time's funny out here," he said. "Sometimes it slows down, helps you breathe again." She didn't answer. Couldn't. Footsteps padded down the hall. A girl with tangled blonde curls peeked in, dragging a stuffed fox. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Is she the lady?" Cassian nodded. "Come say hi." The girl crept closer. "I'm 6. Are you the boy's mom?" "Yes," Alone whispered. "He fixed my flashlight," Rowan said. "All by himself." "Did he?" Rowan nodded. "He's kind of like magic." Cassian chuckled. "You're not wrong." The girl placed the stuffed fox beside Aloan. "His name's Kip. You can borrow him till you feel better." Aloan stared at the fox, then at Cassian. "Why are you doing this?" He met her eyes, steady. "Because someone once stopped for me when they didn't have to, and because your boy looked at me like I might still be good." A knot formed in her throat. She looked away, but he saw the tears. And for once, she wasn't judged for them. He'd said it simply. "You survived." She gave a small nod, tears spilling down her cheeks in quiet streaks. "Barely," she whispered. Cassian took a step forward and handed her a clean dish towel. She accepted it like it was something sacred, like it might hold her together. That night, after the children had finally drifted into sleep, Cassian sat alone on the front porch. A storm was taking shape beyond the ridge, the horizon darkening with it. The air held a weight, the kind that buzzed beneath the skin. Inside, Aloan was resting. Her breathing had deepened, no longer jagged, no longer hunted. Cassian tipped his head up to the sky, then shut his eyes. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wasn't afraid of it. He had lived out here long enough to recognize when something didn't quite belong. It wasn't Aloan, not this time. It was the boy. Odden wasn't just smart. He was different. Cassian had known bright kids before. Rowan, for instance, had taught herself to read by decoding road signs when she was 4. But Odden was another thing entirely. He had the precision of an engineer and the stillness of someone born with purpose. There was calculation in his gaze and invention in his hands, and not once did he act like he was showing off. That was what startled Cassian the most. Take the clock, for instance. The cuckoo clock had gathered dust on a shelf in the garage for years. Belle, his wife, long gone now, had spotted it at a flea market in Vermont. She'd called it charming, even though it hadn't ticked since the late 90s. Cassian had nearly thrown it out more times than he could count, but never quite could. That morning, when he stepped into the garage to grab his tool bag, Auden was already there, balanced on a plastic crate, his small hands buried elbow-deep in the old clock's innards. He hadn't asked to be there. He hadn't even looked around for permission. He'd simply opened the back, laid the guts of it out on a rag like a surgeon, and begun. Cassian watched from the doorway, arms folded. "Need a hand?" Auden barely looked up. "No, thank you." "You sure you know what you're doing?" "I read a book on pendulum timing," the boy replied, like he was talking about breakfast cereal. "The problem's in the escapement wheel." Cassian blinked. "What's your last name, Auden?" There was the briefest pause. The boy's face remained steady, but his fingers slowed. "Hart," he said. Cassian gave a slow nod, registering the hesitation. "You hungry?" Auden finally looked up, eyes an intense, unnerving blue. "Starving." Cassian smiled. "Let's fix that first." Over breakfast, Alone sat at the table, her hair still damp from a morning wash, wrapped in a towel. The bruises along her arms were fading, yellowing at the edges, softening into something almost survivable. She looked stronger now, not quite steady, but no longer shattering. Cassian poured her a mug of coffee. "Your son fixed my clock." Alone raised an eyebrow. "Of course he did." "Do you homeschool him?" She hesitated. "We did for a while. My husband, he was brilliant. An engineer. His brain worked like a blueprint. But after he died, everything changed." "What about school?" Cassian asked. "I tried public school in the city," she murmured. "They said Auden was disruptive, kept correcting the teacher, said he lacked social cohesion." Cassian snorted into his cup, which is code for smarter than we're comfortable with. Alone's smile was soft, sad. He started building things from scraps. "One morning I woke up, and the hallway light had been rewired to a motion sensor. I asked him how he knew how. He said he just listened." Cassian watched the boy now, seated cross-legged on the rug beside Rowan. They were building a solar system, planets fashioned from washers and bottle caps, hung from chopsticks with bits of thread. Rowan giggled as her moon swung wide into Saturn. "I've never met a kid like him," Cassian said quietly. "You and me both," Alone replied, voice barely above a breath. That afternoon, Rowan insisted on teaching Auden to climb trees. They wandered out back, where the yard still bore the ghosts of a swing set, now reduced to rust and memory. Cassian stayed close, splitting wood, his gaze never far from the children. Auden balked at first, said he didn't like heights. Rowan told him he didn't have to climb high, just high enough to see the leaves from the inside. That convinced him. By the time Cassian wiped the sweat from his brow, Auden was perched on a thick branch, stiff but determined. Rowan cheered from below like a football announcer. From the porch, Alone watched, arms folded tight, face frozen in awe and sorrow. It was the expression of a mother witnessing her child be allowed to be a child again. As the sun dipped low, she helped Cassian with dinner. She refused to sit still. Insisted on chopping carrots one-handed while he watched her carefully. "I worked in a cafe once," she said as she sliced with a rhythm born of muscle memory, "before everything." "What happened after?" Her eyes dropped. "I married up." Cassian raised an eyebrow. "That always a bad thing?" "Depends how far up you go, and how far they let you fall when the ladder breaks." He didn't pry. Instead, he reached across the counter, gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't care who you were," he said, "not unless it hurts who you could be." She froze, then turned back to the carrots, but her hands shook a little less. That night, while the kids dozed beneath a fort made from cushions and quilts, Cassian opened the tin where he kept things he rarely let himself see. Old letters, baby photos of Caleb, memories that bit back. At the bottom was an envelope. Marchand Industries, confidential. He remembered it showing up the day after Caleb's funeral. He'd never opened it. Couldn't. Maybe a job offer, maybe sympathy. Either way, it remained sealed. He stared at it, heart hammering. Then, 3 knocks. Alone stood in the doorway, lit by moonlight, shawl tight around her shoulders. "I just remembered something," she said, voice thin with memory. "The name, Marchand. My husband worked for them. His father, Edward Marchand. He disappeared after the funeral. just vanished. Cassian's grip on the envelope tightened. The boy with blueprints in his mind wasn't just talented, he was destined. The storm didn't break with thunder. Not out here. In the ridge country, storms came like secrets, slow and steady. They made the air tense, made the world hold its breath. Even the birds went still. Cassian stepped outside just as dusk fell, one hand resting on the porch post, eyes on the mountains. The clouds rolled in like bruises, and the scent of rain tasted like steel. Inside, Aloan folded blankets. Rowan and Odden cleaned up their galaxy of toys. The two of them had become something like gravity to each other. Rowan's spark, Odden's strange stillness, orbiting in tandem. "You expecting it to get bad?" Aloan asked. "Wind. Maybe lightning. Quick but strong." "Should we go into town?" Cassian shook his head. "We're safer here." She nodded, but her grip on the chair was tight. He moved with the rhythm of old instincts, checking locks, gutters, generator fuel. Years in solitude had taught him that survival didn't come from panic. It came from readiness. But even as he moved, his eyes kept drifting back to the window, where Aloan stood, all wound wire and waiting breath. The rain came sudden. Wind bent the trees. The windows tapped under the weight of it. Odden watched the storm like it was speaking in code. Rowan curled tight against her stuffed fox. Cassian lit lanterns, wedged towels beneath doors, pulled firewood inside. Alone, even injured, helped, steady and quiet. But when the lights blinked out, the cabin plunged into black, and she froze. He turned just in time to see her brace against the wall, eyes clamped shut, breath short and shallow. "Aloan?" he said gently. She didn't answer. He stepped closer, not touching, just there. "You're safe. We've got light. A generator, too. You're not alone in this storm." Her voice came like paper tearing. "It's not the dark." "Then what?" "Being trapped," she whispered. "When I was with him, if I messed up, they'd lock me in the pantry. No windows, no clocks. I never knew how long I'd be in there." Cassian's chest pulled tight. "You're not in that house anymore," he said. "You're in mine, and no one gets locked away in my home." She looked up, tears in her lashes, and something inside her began to loosen. Then, a crash. Cassian swore, reaching for his coat. "Stay with the kids. I'll check it." "No," she said, standing straighter. "Let me." He stared. "You've done everything," she said. "You shouldn't always have to be the one saving everyone." Before he could reply, Rowan screamed. Odden was gone. The door swung open. Cassian was already sprinting into the storm. The rain battered him, wind clawing. Then a voice. "Mom, I dropped it." He followed it down the slope. The swing, meant for the burn pile, had come loose and lodged in a tree. Beneath it, in the mud, Odden knelt, clutching something tight. Cassian slogged through the muck. "You hurt?" Odden shook his head, soaked through. "I dropped Kip," he said. "She was scared. I didn't want her to lose it." In his small, mud-slick hands was Rowan's stuffed fox. Cassian knelt, throat tight. "You're a good brother." "I'm not her brother," Odden whispered. Cassian pulled him close. "You are," he said, voice rough. "In every way that matters." Back inside, Aloan took them both in, towel shaking in her hands. When she saw Kip, she gasped, tears spilling. Cassian stripped the boy's clothes, bundled him in a blanket, and looked out the window. The storm had broken. The forest stood still. Later, with the children curled beside the fire, Aloan sat beside him in the rocking chair, her shoulder bandaged, aching. "Thank you," she said, barely louder than the wind still whispering outside. "For what?" she asked quietly. "For not locking the door? For being the man my son ran to, not from?" Cassian didn't answer right away. His eyes lingered on the children curled up together on the worn couch, their small hands still knotted in sleep, a lifeline between them. "I lost a boy once," he said at last, his voice roughened by time and salt. 5 years ago. He was 3. Leukemia. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The air between them filled with a hush heavier than silence. Alone's breath caught in her throat, not with shock, but with recognition. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw not pity but something older and deeper. Understanding. Not just grief, but survival. The kind that builds its own language out of wreckage. "I left everything," he continued. "Quit my job, sold the house, packed what was left of us and came here with Rowan. Built this place board by board just to remember what it felt like to create something again. Anything." She nodded slowly, a quiet surrender in her posture. Something shifted then, fragile and unspoken. The storm outside had faded to memory, just a soft patter against the walls, but inside something else had started. Not romance, not yet, but a quiet warmth. A fire lit by survivors who knew how to tend to something without rushing it to flame. Later, in the kitchen's soft lantern glow, Cassian stood alone. The children were still asleep. He leaned on the counter, boots leaving damp prints on the wood, streaks of earth and remembrance. In his hand was a thick envelope. Marchand Industries, confidential, retrieved from the rusted tin box he hadn't opened in years. He hadn't gone looking for it. Not tonight. But when Alone had whispered that name, Edward Maron, something old and unsettled stirred awake inside him. He turned the envelope slowly in his fingers. It was high-grade paper, textured, embossed. He remembered the courier clearly, polished shoes, black car too sleek for mountain roads. The envelope had arrived the morning after Caleb's funeral, when the house still reeked of lilies and antiseptic grief. He hadn't opened it, not from anger, but because the world had gone numb. No offer from a billionaire could matter when your child wasn't breathing. And now... Marchand was no longer just a name. The next morning, Alone found the letter lying open on the table. The cabin was quiet, still holding the breath of early light. Cassian had already left to take Rowan to school and fetch propane from town. She didn't intend to read it. She wasn't a pariah. She hadn't even questioned when her husband began locking his office door or when bank statements stopped coming. But something about this envelope, the thickness of the paper, the care in its creases, made her pause, and then she saw the name again. Edward Marchand. Her breath snagged. She gripped the sink, fingers digging into the edge. Was this coincidence, or the cruel symmetry of a life that loved to circle back just when you'd begun to breathe again? Cassian returned late in the day, cheeks pink from wind, arms full of groceries and a scarf for Rowan still wrapped in tissue. He stopped in the doorway, eyes catching on her figure in the kitchen. The envelope was still there between them, like a third, unwelcome guest. "You opened it?" he asked, not accusing, just surprised. "I didn't read it," she said softly. "I saw the name. That was enough." He set the bag down with careful hands. "So it's real, the name Marchand. It means something to you." She nodded. "Julian Marchand. My husband, son of Edward. He died in a car crash 3 years ago." She hesitated, then added, "Or they said it was an accident. But nothing after that felt accidental." He waited, unmoving. "They blamed me," she continued. "His family said I'd seduced him for his money, that I was never good enough, that Odden wasn't really his." Her voice didn't break, but her fingers trembled in her lap. Cassian sat across from her, quiet and still. "They tried to buy me off after the funeral," she said. "Offered a settlement if I signed away custody. When I refused, they changed tactics. Legal threats, rumors, even surveillance. I found a wiretap in my car. Someone smashed the front window a week later. After that, I ran." She didn't cry. She didn't need to. "You think Edward was behind it?" Cassian asked. "I don't know," she replied. "Julian always said his father didn't trust anyone, not even him. But after he died, Edward disappeared. From everything. No press, no public appearances. It was like he just vanished." Cassian let out a long, tired breath. "That letter came the day after I buried my son. I didn't open it until now. What could a man like that possibly say to someone like me?" Alone looked at him, eyes soft with something between sorrow and awe. "You lost a son too." He nodded. "Caleb, cancer. He was 3. Sometimes I still hear his voice in the quiet." She didn't answer for a long time. Then, gently, "Maybe that's why Odden ran to your truck. Maybe he saw something in you, something I hadn't let myself see yet." That night, while the children bickered over whether Saturn had 3 rings or 4 and turned blankets into a castle, Alone stepped out onto the porch. Cassian followed, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. The air was still. Trees dripped slowly in the golden hush of evening. "I've been thinking," her voice almost swallowed by the dusk. "Maybe it's time to stop running." He lifted an eyebrow. "I'm tired," she confessed, "of being afraid, of watching Odden double-check every lock, of teaching him how to disappear instead of how to speak up." Cassian took a slow sip. "And what would you do instead?" She hesitated. "I want to go to the courthouse. I want to face it, all of it, the lies, the accusations. I want to tell the truth before someone else writes the story for me." He was silent for a moment, then nodded. "That takes guts. I don't know if I have them." You do, he said simply. She turned to him, expression unreadable. Cassian, if I go and they find us, what if they take him from me? He looked out into the trees, jaw set. Then I'll burn down every courthouse in this state before I let that happen. She let out a sound, half sob, half laugh. Are you always this dramatic? Only when it matters. That night, under a sky stitched with stars, Alone found Cassian at the kitchen table again, the envelope open in his hands. This time he read the letter. Mr. Wolfe, my name is Edward Marchand. You do not know me, but I have followed your story. You owe me nothing, but I fear I owe you something. There are moments in a man's life when power speaks louder than conscience, when fear wears the mask of pride. I have failed my son, I have failed my grandson, and I fear I may be failing you now. But you have not vanished, you have not broken, you have endured, and in that there may be something I need to ask of you. Cassian looked up, the words heavy in his chest. Alone's eyes shimmered with tears she hadn't allowed to fall. He knew, she whispered. Cassian nodded. And he's coming. The Lowen's eyes narrowed. What's the catch? No catch, Edward replied calmly. Just a request. He turned to Cassian, his gaze steady. I built a life behind walls so high I forgot what was beyond them. And when Julian died, I was too proud to mourn him in public. Too much of a coward to stand beside the woman he loved. Then his eyes shifted to Odden. If this boy ever carries my name, I want the man who raised him, the one who truly raised him, to be at his side. The room grew still, thick with the weight of what had been spoken. Rowan's voice broke through. Does that mean Cassian gets to be like a grandpa too? Everyone looked at her. Edward allowed the faintest smile. Perhaps it does, little one. That night, the Rolls-Royce remained parked beneath the trees. Edward had declined his usual trappings. No driver, no security. Just a suitcase and a quiet room in Cassian's cabin. He wanted to sleep beneath the same roof, to exist on the same soil, without pretense. Out on the porch, Alone stood beside Cassian, arms tucked tight against the creeping chill. Do you believe him? She asked, not looking at him. Cassian took his time. I believe regret can take root slow, but it still grows. She glanced down at her boots. Part of me wants to forgive him. Part of me wants to let him rot. Cassian gave a humorless smile. That just means you're human. She turned to face him, her eyes shadowed with thought. Do you think Odden should go with him? No, Cassian said quietly, but I think he should know him, and if he's going to inherit anything, let it come from a cabin where he learned to build with his hands. Her expression softened. You always know the right thing to say. He shook his head. No, I just know what I'd have wanted, for my boy. She reached for his hand, not romantic, not quite, but something passed between their palms. Trust, and maybe, just maybe, the fragile beginning of something more. Inside, the fire was low. Odden sat alone, Kip curled under his arm like a heartbeat. The boy was swallowed by the folds of Cassian's leather armchair, staring at the flames, though his thoughts were far from them. He hadn't said much since Edward arrived. Not when the man had offered his apologies. Not when he spoke of legacy, of names, of futures. Not even when Alone had knelt beside him and whispered, whatever you choose, I'm proud of you. That was the problem. Odden didn't know how to choose. He didn't know what made someone a father or a family or a home. But he knew how all of that felt, and that mattered more. Outside, in the mist-heavy morning, Cassian split firewood with slow, practiced rhythm. The axe fell clean through damp logs, steam curling like smoke from their fresh centers. He liked the honesty of it. You hit something. It broke. No pretense, no legacy debates, just work, just truth. Inside, Edward nursed a cup of black coffee, posture stiff with the discomfort of waiting. But today, he waited. He watched Odden carefully, noting how the boy, without being asked, adjusted the skewed drawer in Cassian's workbench, how he traced the trail map on the wall and corrected where the river's curve had changed over time. It wasn't just intelligence, it was intention, quiet certainty, the kind Edward had never seen in Julian, the kind that came from earth, not ivory towers. Cassian stepped in from the cold, sweat dampening his collar. He noticed Edward's gaze. Looks like the boy's been watching you, Edward said lightly. Cassian tossed a towel over a chair. He's observant. Edward nodded toward the boy, who was now flipping through a book on solar circuits, and he listens, even if he doesn't say much. Alone entered then, balancing 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She handed one to Edward, the other to Cassian. Her face unreadable. Edward accepted the mug. "Thank you." She gave no reply. Then Rowan came barreling down the hallway, hair a storm of curls, cheeks pink with sleep. She launched herself into Cassian's leg. "You promised pancakes," she mumbled into his jeans. "I did," he said, ruffling her hair. "Coming right up." Edward watched her skip off. "She's fearless." Cassian nodded, a faint smile curling. "Born in a snowstorm. Spent her first night by a fire. She came into the world already fighting." "I like her," Edward said simply. "You'd better," Cassian muttered. "She runs the place." After breakfast, with dishes drying and sunlight sliding across the kitchen floor, Odden finally spoke. He stood tall, eyes meeting Edward's. "If I take your name," he said slowly, "does it mean I lose the one I already have?" Edward set down his mug. "No, it just means the world might call you something different." Odden nodded. "And if I live in your house? Next, does that mean I leave this one?" Edward hesitated. "It doesn't have to. You could have both." Odden glanced toward Cassian and Alone. "So, what if I don't want both?" Silence fell again, heavier this time. Cassian shifted but didn't speak. Edward leaned forward. "Then I'll respect that." Odden looked at him for a long moment. "I want to stay here, with Cassian, with Mom, with Rowan. I want to wake up in this cabin. I want to fix things, climb trees, build things that aren't meant to be sold." Edward nodded slowly. "All right." But Odden wasn't finished. "If I ever take the Martian name, it'll be because I earn it, not because someone handed it to me like a crown." Cassian felt a deep movement in his chest. Not pride, not relief, something sacred. He looked at Alone. She had turned away, quietly wiping her eyes. Edward sat back. For the first time he looked not defeated, just older, smaller. "Odden," he said gently, "if your father were alive, I think he'd have said the same." Odden looked down at Kip, now clutched in both hands. "He died before I could remember him. But I still feel him sometimes, in my hands, in my questions." Edward reached into his coat and retrieved a small velvet box. He didn't open it, just placed it on the table. This was Julian's. His father gave it to him when he graduated MIT. He never wore it. Said it made him feel trapped. Odden picked it up, opened it. Inside lay a simple silver ring, unmarked. Cassian leaned slightly forward. "You don't have to take it." Odden looked at them all. "I want to, but not as a symbol, as a reminder that I came from somewhere, but I belong here." That night, Edward stayed up beside the fire, said little, his eyes distant. In the morning he left without ceremony. No promises, no weighty farewells, just a quiet thank you at the end of the gravel drive. "You didn't just save a boy," he told Cassian. "You saved a name." Cassian watched the car vanish down the wooded road, then turned back to where Odden was shaping a weather vane out of old scrap metal, and Rowan was chalking the solar system on the cabin wall. Alone stood in the doorway, waiting for him. The mornings were colder now. The sun took longer to climb. Long shadows stretched between the pines. Frost sparkled like sugar across the grass before dissolving in the warm breath of day. Inside, the silence between Cassian and Alone had grown taut. Not uncomfortable, just aware. Something was shifting. She folded laundry at the cedar chest, her arm finally free of the brace. She moved more slowly now, but each step had a steadiness, a claim. She no longer tried to disappear. Cassian watched her from the kitchen, coffee in one hand, the other smoothing creases in a towel he wasn't using. She looked up. Their eyes met. Neither looked away. That afternoon, Alone told the children she had to go into town, to the courthouse. Cassian drove. The truck was quiet, but not strained. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers tangled tight. The closer they got, the tighter they clasped. Cassian glanced over, but didn't speak. The courthouse rose from red brick and old pride. It was too small for the dignity it tried to hold. Alone hesitated at the steps, nearly turned around. Cassian touched her hand. "You're not alone." She nodded once, swallowed, and climbed. Inside, she filed the papers. Requested a hearing to challenge the accusations her in-laws had left behind like traps. The clerk blinked at the name, Julian Martian's widow, the woman who vanished. Alone stood straighter. Cassian didn't speak, but his presence filled the room like armor. When it was over, they stepped back into crisp afternoon air. The courthouse doors shut behind them like a sigh. "I thought I'd fall apart in there," she whispered. "You didn't." "I almost did." "But you didn't." he repeated gently. She stared out the window as trees flew by. I think I was always waiting for someone to stand beside me when I did something hard. But you didn't just stand beside me, Cassian. She turned to him. You stood with me. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. He placed his hand on hers, nothing urgent, just real. And she didn't pull away. That evening, Rowan and Auden built a telescope out of PVC pipe and a cracked magnifier. Cassian read A Wrinkle in Time by the fire, his voice calm, intentional. The kids leaned in, faces glowing. Alone sat beside him on the couch, curled quietly into the corner. She didn't follow the story. She followed him. The rise and fall of his voice, the way he softened sounds for Rowan's ears, the reverence in his tone when the story asked for wonder. And for the first time in years, she realized she wasn't just surviving. She was watching a man love a room. Without ever saying it. Later, after the children had gone to sleep, she stayed on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. Cassian joined her, tea in one hand, silence in the other. I almost left, she said. She had been quiet for a long time before she finally spoke. It was the first night here, when I woke up and realized where I was, who you were, that it was safe. Cassian lifted an eyebrow. Safe made you want to run? Yes. Her voice was barely above a whisper, because I didn't know what to do with that anymore. He nodded slowly, like each word struck something familiar. I get that more than I wish I did. She glanced sideways at him. Do you ever wonder if you should have left? A long silence followed. Then Cassian said quietly, Every day I stayed after Caleb died felt like I was betraying how shattered I was. But if I had gone, I think that would have been a betrayal too, of the part of me that still believed something good might come. She studied his face, moonlight softening the edges of his jaw, making him look younger somehow. Cassian, she said, voice trembling, I don't know what this is between us, but I feel it, and it scares me, because I didn't come here to fall in love. I came to survive. He set his mug down, slow and deliberate. Then let's not call it anything, he said. Not love, not fate, not timing. Let's just agree that something stayed, even when everything else left. Her eyes filled. She leaned in, carefully, as if moving too fast might break the moment, and rested her forehead against his. His hand lifted, calloused and warm, cradling the back of her head. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But something deeper passed between them, something older than desire, older than fear. The kind of closeness that didn't need to be named, only honored. That night, Elowen fell asleep on the couch, a book splayed across her chest, a blanket tucked around her with quiet, unseen care. She never heard Cassian pull the armchair closer to the fire and sit, watching the flames long after they dimmed. He didn't know what the morning would bring. Legal filings, signatures, maybe resistance. But in that hour, for the first time in a long time, his heart wasn't running anymore. Not because it had nowhere else to go, but because it had found something, someone, worth stopping for. The ribbon was only a symbol. Auden had insisted on using real scissors, not the dull red plastic ones. This matters, he'd said, solemn as ever. Rowan held the ribbon tight, her tongue poking out in concentration. Elowen stood just behind them, trying not to cry. Cassian stood in the middle of it all, slightly overwhelmed, boots dusty with sawdust, a hammer still tucked into his back pocket. They were opening a school, their school. It didn't have a name yet. Cassian had offered something practical, Ridge Hollow Learning Centre. Rowan had proposed, in full seriousness, Rainbow Unicorn School for smart kids and scientists. Auden, in his quiet way, had suggested the Wolfheart School for Wonder. The sign wasn't painted yet. For now, it just said one word, welcome. And maybe that was enough. Behind them stood a barn, reborn, its wide windows soaking up sunlight, a wood stove at its heart, books lined up on shelves donated by neighbours from miles around, desks cobbled together from old doors, mismatched chairs, solar panels, tools in the shed, one cracked globe that still spun. And a blackboard, because every real school needed a blackboard. It had begun with a letter, not from Edward Marchand, but from someone he had quietly reached out to. A former superintendent, disillusioned with bureaucracy, hungry for something real. She'd visited, taken one look at Auden's inventions, and said, "This is already better than half the charter schools I've toured." She'd left with a promise and returned with paperwork, grant options, and the names of 3 families whose children had never returned to class after the pandemic. We could give them something, Cassian had said one night. Elowan had touched his hand. No, Cassian, you already did. We're just making it official. That morning, the neighbours came. The mailman brought lemonade. Mrs. Albright, 80 years old and unsteady on her walker, baked 6 loaves of banana bread. Someone played the fiddle, someone else cried, but most just came, with presence, with witness. And Auden stood up to speak. It wasn't long, it wasn't loud, but it silenced the crowd like snowfall. I used to think I didn't belong, he said, that being smart made me weird, and not having a dad meant I was missing something big. He paused, looked at Cassian. But then I came here, and I learned that family isn't about blood, it's about who stays. Later, after the crowds had drifted back into their lives, Cassian sat on the porch with a cold drink in hand, boots still gritty with sawdust. Elowan joined him with a book under her arm, a smile just beginning at the edges. You know, she said, settling beside him, when I first got here, I thought you were a little odd. He chuckled. That's generous. You didn't ask questions. You didn't try to fix me. You just made space. Cassian looked out across the clearing where Rowan and Auden were now darting back and forth, their kites made from grocery bags, catching what little wind there was. I've learned, he said, that people don't always need answers. Sometimes they just need somewhere to be. She set her book down. Do you ever miss the world? Which one? The noisy one, the fast one, with traffic and neon and emails. He shook his head slowly. I miss some of the people who used to live in it with me, but not the world itself. She nodded, quiet. I'm not afraid of quiet anymore. He turned, watching the way the last light of day caught her cheekbone, the calm in her breath. I think, he said, I was waiting for you. She looked at him, eyes steady and sure, and I think I was waiting for a place like this, for a man like you. The kiss wasn't dramatic, it wasn't rushed, it was real, like rain on dry earth, like 2 rivers choosing the same direction at last. That night, the barn stood lit under a sea of stars. The chalkboard still bore Auden's words. What makes something worth building? Cassian had read those words before locking the door. He didn't know the answer, but he knew what it felt like. It felt like children laughing on soil once soaked with grief, like a woman who had finally stopped running, like a man who'd opened his arms when the world came knocking, not with solutions, but with shelter.